I have to confess that single layer cards are not my favorite cards to make. In fact, I love lots of layers with stamps and dies, and that's what we're going to do today with this celebration card. This is Marla with Mad About Cards and Crafts. Thanks for joining me. Here's a look at the products we're using from Catherine Pooler. I'm going to be creating a monochromatic card again. I do have two pink inks. One is Rose Petal and the other is Pink Champagne. From the Greetery, I have Toadstool Garden and then the Birthday Blooms stamp and die set. I'll also be using the Inside Out Berry Branch. This is a twofer. You get an inlaid piece and you get the outer edge. I have the Foliage background stamp, the Crimped circles, again from the Greetery, and finally from Spellbinders, this etched circle and Meadow borders from Fawn. We're going to start with our toadstools and do a little bit of ink blending. There are two layers to the caps of the mushrooms. For the bottom layer, I'm adding my darkest color because there would be shadowing underneath. I'm going to start with a light coat of the Rose Petal. I'm using a larger brush for this. I will come back in because you can see that there are some, you can see the underside of some of the caps of the mushrooms, and I am going to use a smaller brush which is going to pick up more ink and allow me to add a more concentrated layer of color to those areas. For the tops of the caps, I'm using my lighter pink. Again, I am going a little monochromatic with the pinks and the white. I will add a light touch of the Pink Champagne over the tops of the caps. Now, some of the caps do have die cuts, little texture circles in them, which adds to the charm of these little mushrooms. And here's where I'm adding that darker color to the bottom, and it's going to help add a little bit of dimension. Each of those caps has a little slit, or I think two of the three have a little bit of a slit in them, so you can just add your stems, which I colored off screen with the Pink Champagne. Catherine Pooler ink is water reactive, so of course I had to add some water splatters to the caps and dry it off with my Ranger heat tool. And finally, I'm going to bring in a little bit more of that white by adding some white gouache spatters to each of those mushroom caps, being very heavy-handed. I'll dry it with my heat tool to make sure that I don't smear any of that, because I am one who would probably pick it up and end up smearing it. So I will use my heat tool to dry that back, and then we'll start working on our base. This is a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch top folding card base, and I am going to use the Foliage red rubber die. I've removed the foam pad from my Misty because this is a thicker stamp, and I'm inking it up generously with that Rose Petal ink. I want to soften it just a little, but I also want to give a little bit of that watercolor illusion. So I'm going to spritz this with some water, and then I'll flip that lid over and stamp it onto that card panel. I did use a little bit of Scotch tape underneath the card panel to make sure that it stayed in place, because sometimes when I lift up my stamps, I don't know about you, but it will lift up my paper, and the magnets will not hold it down. All right, so I have the Inside Out branch. There's the outside edge cut from dusty cardstock, and then I cut it a second time using white cardstock, and I'm doing that inlay effect, so I'm going to use both pieces. I used the Crimped circle using that same dusty rose cardstock, and then the etched edge circle to add a little bit more interest in that pop of white. I die cut the Meadow borders, and then once I die cut the Meadow border, I used that same circle die that I used for the white die cut, and I cut that out so it would nestle nicely, adding an additional layer to my composition. I'm going to add some foam to the back of my circles, so this is just some fun foam. I had some scrap pieces from other projects, and I'm just cutting them up, using little bits and pieces here and there to fill in that circle. It'll give just a little bit of a pop off that dusty rose circle and a nice place for my scene to be built. I've used some wet glue to adhere the fun foam and the circle. And then I'm going to add a little bit of glue to the bottom half of that grass, making sure that I leave some areas where I can tuck in both that berry branch as well as my mushrooms. I'm going to cut this berry branch up. It comes in a nice, beautiful single piece, but I wanted 3 pieces that were going to that I could place behind my mushrooms to try to balance out the scene a little bit more. If I left it in one piece in the center, I don't think that it would flow quite as nicely. So it is easy to cut, and because I am layering those mushrooms over the top of it where there are areas that don't tuck underneath the grass, those will be covered up by my mushrooms. So this is kind of a dry fitting. I just wanted to leave this in so that you could see why I ended up cutting that branch, making sure that I liked the way that the foliage, this additional layer underneath, was going to work with those mushrooms. You could use different leaves. You could use flowers behind it. That would be pretty. But I just thought that this berry branch was a nice, subtle foliage piece to put behind. And once I get all of this put together, we are going to add a little bit more texture to the background. So with the white grass and with the white circle, the grass is getting lost, so you can see it's kind of blending together. I am going to be using the Birthday Blooms stamp and die set. I did cut it out 3 times using white cardstock and the coordinating die for the word celebrate. Once I die cut this out, I like to keep that negative piece where the die cut came from, and I use it for my stamping. So I'll place it inside my MISTI, and then I'll place my stamp inside that area. Once I do that, I'll close my MISTI door, pick up my stamp, and then I'm going to add the die cut piece, as you can see right there, stamp or add that rose petal to the word celebrate. And then I'm going to stamp this 3 different times. So I want to make sure that I get, number one, a really crisp impression, but I also wanted to make sure that it was fairly dark, again giving me a different tone of that rose petal ink. And then once we finish with that, we are going to add that texture to the sky portion, quote unquote, of our scene. And for that, I'm going to use a little piece of cellophane. This is an old technique, but I love the effect. So I'm just adding that wadded up cellophane to my ink and stamping it onto the background using that pink champagne. That's going to give that little bit of texture and really just kind of separate the white grass from the sky. I'll center my circle. I did use the Celebrate die to make sure that I had it placed in the right area, making sure that I had enough room for my die cut word. And once I get this straightened, then we're going to start gluing everything down. I started with the outside edge of the branch, so I did add some glue, mostly to the bottom third of that die cut because it is hanging over the edge, and we do have that foam tape behind that white circle. It is going to just kind of float up top, which is the way that I really like my foliage. I typically don't glue everything down because I like that movement. And once I get the outer layer glued down, then I inlay the Dusty Rose. Again, we're going to mess up this berry branch. I'm going to start laying this and realize that, oh, nope, I do have the right piece. I thought that I got the wrong piece in. I did tuck that underneath the grass, so I did get it correct the first time. And then we'll add our middle section, adding glue to the outer edge, placing it in the center. Again, those caps or those mushrooms are going to camouflage any of the areas that do not tuck in and seem to be floating. So you're going to see with my next branch, when I tuck it in, I'm not going to tuck it all the way down. I'll add my mushroom first and then kind of tuck it behind. So for my mushroom caps, or my mushrooms, I'm doing the same thing, but on the caps, I'm not adding glue. all the way to the top. I'll come back and add a little bit more glue to that later to make sure that everything is going to be movable so that I can tuck things in place. So this is how I do my layering. I kind of do a dry fitting, and then I take a picture of it, I know where I want things, and then I start adding pieces, making sure to be pretty light-handed when I'm putting things down, so that if I need to lift it up, which is why I like the wet glue, I can. So I've added one of my mushrooms to the right side, and they have both, the second one on the left has been tucked in under the grass just like the one on the right. To bring this mushroom closer, I'm going to add it on top of the grass. First, I'm going to add my little berry branch, and then I'm going to start tucking in my foliage. So this is that last little piece that needs to go behind, and you're going to see that it's going to be free floating. It's not going all the way down to the bottom of the grass, but that smaller mushroom is going to camouflage that. So I'm able to maneuver everything so that that doesn't show. So here's our final mushroom going down, and you can see that that cap covers that area nicely. I have die cut, as I mentioned, the word celebrate 3 times. So this could be a birthday card, it could be a graduation card, any type of occasion that you want to celebrate. I left the inside blank so that I can use it at a later date for whatever we're celebrating. So I thought it was a great word to use on this. And once I get these 3 pieces together, I will add it to the bottom of that circle, and that will complete my card for today. So I hope you enjoyed this layered card. I hope it encourages you to use both your stamps and your dies when you're creating cards. If it did, please make sure to give this video a big thumbs up. Let me know what you think of this pink monochromatic card. And until next time, I hope that you have a fabulous day. Thanks so much for stopping by to watch. I have to confess that